Rudy Giuliani on behalf of state legislators.
I need to do it. Getting rid of the window glare.
See, if you want to sit up, well, we're not. I'm not showing us. I can't.
Good morning, David and Perry.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm okay. How are you?
Good.
We're great. How are you?
Well, how do we look?
Yeah, you look terrific. You look terrific. How's the weather in Sarasota?
Not so good today.
But we're
No.
not complaining about a 50-degree temperature.
I guess not when ours is 20, so.
Yeah. We had Temple Israel South here this past weekend.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, we hosted Joe and Michael Rosen. They slept over here Friday night, and at
Very
dinner
nice.
went Nancy and Ari Bortinger as well. So 6 of us had Shabbat dinner together.
Very nice.
Went out to dinner again last night.
Great.
So that was very lovely.
Lovely. Lovely. Well, you have an audience already. As you might be unaware, so far we have about, let's see, 6 other participants at this moment. And those will be joining us as we speak. So I think your computer is all set to go. I think mine is the same. I'll be admitting people as they arrive. And I will do my formal introduction, of course. And I will tell people about using chat. And if they have questions, again, you may want to, wherever you want to, because you are in total control of this. It's not me. Stop at any point if you wish to have questions, because certainly Storm King has not just historic background that you would share, but when you get into the pictures of some of the artwork, they all come from different sculptors and artists. And although you may add to their definition, people may have other questions of curiosity. Although I'm sure, again, they certainly all can wait, and I'll encourage them to put them in chat, and then you'll be able to see them as well as I, and I'll try to monitor them and feed them back to you in case so we can get everyone included. The time, as I said, we minimally have an hour. What we can go, usually it's up to you again, being in charge, is to, if you wish to have more dialogue beyond that hour. There is no rush, certainly. We have a good morning to do that. Weather is crisp and bright here. Thank goodness it's not storming, so I don't think people will be doing too many outside activities, but it is a nice day here. So it opens up for an opportunity to have a really terrific program today. And I know you saw your press in the Standard.
That was terrific. That was
Wasn't it?
I was shocked. It was really a good article. Well written.
Well written, nice pictures, great PR. I was very impressed and unexpected. It was unexpected because you never know what the press. We do send press releases to the Standard about upcoming speakers and events, and they know of the programs that I'm moving forward, so they put that in their calendar many times. But someone picked up upon it and said, "Wow, this is even better than just a calendrical event." So it was really good to see. So we are about 10:50, as I said. People will be joining us, and we'll welcome them as they arrive. But I'll wait till about a few minutes after 11:01, 11:02, really to begin more of an introduction, so that you'll be able to start with your first slide, which does talk about trickling in. And the way this works is I will ask people to mute because the speaker view will go to the person that makes the greatest sound, and hopefully that would be you, and it's supposed to be you. So we already have 9 participants, and we are still 9 minutes away from 11 o'clock.
Excellent.
So we're in very, very nice shape, and I think the press certainly added to this, and I think the press not only added to the presentation, it will add to the fact that people are more versed in Storm King that we're not. And I think and I think that's probably one of your desires, to see people take advantage of Storm King.
Absolutely.
And I think as a result of this, that will occur.
Yep.
So that's all good news.
I noticed that you're recording it. If people are unable
At a
to
later
attend
date.
now, how do they go about watching it?
It should be on our website, synagogue.org.
Okay,
At the bottom of the page, I'll double check, but within 24 to 48 hours, it should be on our website. And our website is just a link to a YouTube channel. The synagogue has a YouTube channel,
got
and
it.
on the YouTube channel is your program. So that usually happens within a day to get that all together. So people may go back to review it, and I'll double check that it's there. Sometimes because of other conflicts on the page, it gets moved, but I'll make sure that it's where it belongs.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
No problem at all.
Good.
Well, thanks again in advance for taking the time to do this and prepare. I know this being a love of your, love of 40 years of your life at least.
Yeah.
I think you, as you began to get involved with Storm King, I think you joined the membership of Temple Israel around the same time. You joined in 81, so it's 41 years ago.
Yeah. Exactly right.
So, but there's a parallel there. Your membership in Temple Israel and your interest in the Storm King contemporary art project. So it's a nice, interesting parallel. I know you didn't plan it that way, but it did work out that way.
I think it's great. I agree with you. You can highlight that. That's a good thing.
Just coincidental, I think, more than not. So I really appreciate that. And you're joining a series of quality speakers that have been going on now since the pre-pandemic time. Once upon a time, these speakers would come to the synagogue and we would have more of a community opportunity. But of course, that has been limited. Started back in December to get some live and Zoom events together, but that was quickly crushed by Omicron. So one day we'll go back to more of a live event status, and people will have an opportunity to social engage in addition to being informed and entertained, et cetera, by different programs that move us forward. I'll try to mute anybody that forgets to mute, although I'll ask them to do that. So I have that ability.
They will forget to mute.
Right, but I'll try to catch that. And then you are already been given the screen share ability. So you have that now whenever you choose to do it. Not pushing you to do it, I'm just telling you you have a co-host ability at this point.
You know, if he does it, then it already starts popping up there, right?
Right. So you don't want to do it until you're ready. However you want to do it, you may want to say hello and welcome to anyone that is joining us, and you can preface your own remarks and then tell people to go. You'll be going into your presentation and however you wish to disseminate that information.
Great.
So
Terrific.
I know you're well versed in speaking in front of groups and your own constituents and partners and employees, so you'll have a real positive opportunity just sitting from your living room to share this. That's one of the benefits of Zoom. We get kind of an audience from anywhere in the world.
I agree. You're doing a great job. I think there's more adult ed programs and
Right.
the diversity on Zoom that you're organizing. It's fabulous. Just fabulous, really.
Thank you very much. When I was saying worldwide, I just wanted to harken back to when Sandy and Don Armstrong did a program. So we were going from Hawaii. So that made it even more worldwide. And I think someone from Australia joined us. So I do mean worldwide. That's just not a matter of opportunity. It's the truth.
Good.
With a few minutes to go, we're up to 17 different screens.
I see Jackie.
Welcome to wave to anybody you like.
Hi, Jackie.
How are you?
Good. How are you? How's
Great,
everything?
thanks.
Good?
Yeah, good.
Excellent.
Is the weather good?
Well, a little cold this morning. It was 50. We're not complaining.
No. You sound like Floridians when you complain about 50.
2 days ago, it was 78. No complaint.
No one was complaining then.
How's the kids and the baby? Good?
Everybody's good. In fact, I had the baby with me and Evan just came and picked her up. Evan, I have an Evan too.
Right.
And because they said, can't you watch her while you watch Dr. Namerow's thing? And I said, you know what? If I actually have to watch her while I'm watching Dr. Namerow's thing, I'm not watching Dr. Namerow's thing. So they came and picked her up and I'll probably head over there or get her later in the day. So
Okay. Good.
all good.
Excellent. Excellent.
In the microwave.
Hi, Eli.
Hello there. How are you all?
Good. How are you?
Good, thank God. It's good to see you all.
We hope at some point to see you live. We'll see. We'll see if we can.
Yes. We spoke, we got the emails from senior moment.
That's okay. We'll do it. We'll get it together.
What part was that thing?
All right.
We're coming up at about 3 or 4 minutes.
Excellent. Good. Jimmy Margulies. Good.
Morning to those that just joined us. Looking forward to a program that will start in a couple of minutes. If you'd be good enough to make sure you're on mute, that would be great. So Dr. Namerow will have the stage when it's time.
Super soft. Okay, so charcoal, this is called Canyon Plum. Fewer than 250 to go around. Blue Depths, fewer than 100. Valley Orchid, wow, that's gorgeous. And Dark Olive. Ooh, you could pair that with the Dark Olive pants from the last set. And
Who is that?
Here it was Carol.
David,
Yeah,
I think Caitlin's not going to put her video on, but Caitlin's going to listen to your talk. She is a huge fan of Storm King, and she tells me she wants to get married there someday.
Hi, David and Perry. Susie. Hi. Can't hear you.
hi,
Oh, okay.
how's everything? Good to see you.
Good. Same here. Same here.
Excellent, excellent.
You're looking good.
So
Gonna put me.
why are you giving me, why?
Hi.
Hi,
Hi
Barbara.
there. How are you?
Hi. Good to see you guys.
Good. Hi, hi. How are you? Bronx house, buddy. Yeah.
I'm good, Froggy.
How are you, Wendy? Good to see you.
Doing okay. Toasted or lightly?
Light.
Are you going to tell us how the weather is in Florida and make us feel bad?
I
Today
could.
you won't feel that badly.
It was a low of 49 this morning and it's 50 now, but a few days ago it was 78. Not going to rub it in. So it's not 14 or 12 or whatever you guys have been enduring. So we're not complaining.
Give it another minute.
Honey, it's time.
Hi, Diane.
Namerow.
How are you?
What is unmute yourself?
Say hello, everybody. And at this end of Florida, it was about 38, 40 degrees. Was not warm.
Forwarded to it.
Oh, 11 o'clock, okay. Oh, great, remind me. Thank you.
Here from Eritrea, a country in East Africa, when she was just 3 years old. Once here in the valley, she formed a tight bond with East Africans sharing a similar story.
When people immigrate here, they hold on to each other, these relationships. It's the only group in the family we know.
Friends, Marina and Lydia, considered Solange to be her little sister.
She's a natural born leader.
David.
She's loving, kind. He great ass. I mean, she has it.
Hello, David and Perry.
Hello, folks.
Hey, Manny.
Hey, Manny, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good to see you.
Same here.
The position at a law firm in New York City.
That didn't fire. It's everything that fire.
She was the president of Howard African Law Student Association. He said good Instagram post that says she brought the genuine kindness to every race. Her warmth reflected by her nickname.
And she's one of those people that will turn your life.
I want to say welcome to everyone that's joined us this morning. If you you're on Zoom, I'd ask you to go put yourself on mute so that we can begin our presentation, and we'll only have one speaker talking at a time.
Howard University.
So we still have a couple people who are not muted yet. We'll give you a chance to do that. Okay, I think we're doing pretty well. So welcome and good morning. My name is Bob Smolin, and on behalf of Temple Israel, on our continuing adult education series of excellence, today we have the wonderful opportunity to speak with Dr. David Namerow from the sunny shores of Sarasota. And he will give us an amazing talk today about Storm King, a little background so I can introduce him more formally. Many of you do know him, and he's a longtime member of Temple Israel, 40+ years. Born and raised in the Bronx, Dr. Namerow attended CCNY, University of Louisville School of Medicine, followed by pediatric training at Cincinnati Children's Hospital and the University of Maryland. Moreover, he and his wife Perry, who retired as professor of public health at Columbia, raised 3 daughters in Ridgewood, joined the shul, as I said, 40 plus years ago, and are the proud Circle of Honor members at Temple Israel. Retiring from his practice of pediatric, the founder of the Pediatric Care Associates, Dr. Namerow has been a volunteer docent at Storm King Art Center for the past 5 years. As I mentioned to Dr. Namerow earlier, that his involvement with Storm King, or his connection, goes back almost 40 plus years, when he took his family to take a look at this amazing contemporary art museum in a field of many acres. And has his latest press in the Jewish Standard, we hope you caught that. He's been a regular with his family taking these fall trips. And this morning, Dr. Namerow will share his love of Storm King and the knowledge about it that he's gathered over the last 5 years. As a docent, he's become an expert on the history of the parks, and I know he'll include that in his conversation. So we will ask you to keep yourselves on mute. Use the chat feature if you have a question. Dr. Namerow may pause when he finds the time to allow questions and answers if you would like to have some. I know that Storm King will provide the opportunity for many interesting questions, but it's going to be looking forward to at least a wonderful hour here on this beautiful morning. So Dr. Namerow, welcome, and the screen is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Good. Well, first of all, it's really wonderful to do this morning, particularly with so many people that I know. And I want to say thank you, Bob, for inviting me, and also telling you that you have been doing a spectacular job. The adult education program at Temple Israel has more diversity and greater depth than I ever remember. And it's wonderful. And that's mazel tov to you.
Thank you.
So my background, as you know, is growing up in the Bronx. And when you grew up on Pelham Parkway in the Bronx, you always look for places to go on the weekend. And so I remember going to Storm King back in 1961, 62, when I was in high school. On the weekends, we would look for a place to go and drive, and that was one of the places we went. It was in the very early years of Storm King, and they really didn't even have that many sculptures at the time. Subsequently, in college, it was a regular gig that me and college buddies would do and go. Fast forward years later, when we moved to Ridgewood, Storm King became at least a once-a-year occurrence, as Perry and our 3 girls would put together a trip every fall. We would go apple picking and we would go to Storm King. And I have pictures of our girls in front of many of these sculptures. Unfortunately, digitizing them will be another thing that I'll get to do at some point in my life. So with that in mind, we're going to take a whirlwind tour for about the next 50 minutes or so, and provide chat questions to Bob. And I'm going to now share my screen and get my thing going. It'll take me a second. Where is it? There it is. Hold on. There we go. Excellent. So let's take an excruciatingly awkward 2 minutes for people to trickle in. As you know, we've been watching Zooms for the last 2 years. We've seen Zooms of bar and bat mitzvahs. We've seen Zooms of brisses, the Zooms of anniversaries. So today I'm going to try to cover 500 acres in about an hour. So now let's get started. So the history of Storm King really begins with these 2 individuals. That's Peter Stern on the left, and that's Ralph Ogden on the right. Ralph Ogden was born in 1895. He died in 1974. And he was in New York, and he founded a company called the Star Expansion Company, which was a hardware company that dealt with expansion bolts. Ironically, it was in Bayonne, New Jersey. And when the lease ran out in Bayonne, New Jersey, he decided that he was going to move up to Mountainville, and I'll show you a map of where that is in a few minutes. There he moved, he had friends. So that's Ogden on the right. H. Peter Stern had a very different background. He was born in 1928 in Hamburg, Germany. His father was Otto, who was an executive for Royal Dutch Shell. And in 1939, the family was warned by German officers about the risks of being Jewish in Germany at the time. Hence, the family was able to move to Geneva, then Italy, and then the United States. Subsequently, Stern went to Harvard, and then he went to Yale, graduated from law school at Yale. And after basically being in law for a while, he realized he didn't like it. And he was friends with Ogden, who offered him the opportunity to come work for him at the Star Expansion Company. Of interest, they differed in age by about 33 years, but there was a certain common bond. Otto Stern, Peter Stern's father, was killed in a plane crash, and Ogden's son was killed at 18 in a car crash. So many people feel that basically Ogden got the son that he was missing, and Stern got the father that he was missing. Ironically, years later, Stern married Ogden's daughter. So they moved up to Mountainville, and here's a map where you see where it is. Storm King is near West Cornwall. It's about 45 minutes north of Bergen County. When they moved up there, the company flourished a great deal. And at one point, this is the size of it. And you can still see this. This is the original Star Expansion Company. It's now been divided up, and there are many different companies in there. But at one point, he had over 500 employees. And Ogden became very, very philanthropic and involved with the area and Corning and that whole area. Number one, he donated money to the hospital. He donated playgrounds. He became quite a philanthropic guy. Well, while they were up there, they had a friend by the name of Vermont Hatch. This is a picture of Vermont Hatch as he was trying to create a mansion. Vermont Hatch was born in 1893, and he graduated from Columbia Law, and he then went to work for White and Case. He was general counsel. He was friends with Ogden, and he wanted to build a replica of a Normandy mansion. And here are some of the earliest photos of his working on that Normandy mansion. There's another one. There you see Vermont. And by the way, Vermont is distantly related to Utah politician Orrin Hatch. And here's another one. Well, in 1959, Hatch died. And a few years later, Ogden and Stern got the idea of buying the entire property and the land. Why? They had the idea of having some kind of a museum. Well, with all the work they did, this is the way that same mansion looks today. Remarkable transformation. But to do that, they had to go and get granite and other pieces that would be good to help build a museum center. They knew of a mansion that was along the Hudson called Damskammer. It was built in Newburgh, and this is a picture of that mansion in 1835. And this was in 1835, and 20 years later, this mansion was torn down, and the gentleman who bought it built a brick factory that went on to make a lot of the bricks for the Empire State Building, the Waldorf Astoria, etc. Well, Ogden found in the woods, sitting there doing nothing, these columns that you see. And it was his idea to bring them to Storm King, where they now represent the iconic view that you have looking down at many of the sculptures. So that was the beginning. Now, when they bought the land, it was very cheap. And the reason it was cheap was for this reason. They were building the New York State Thruway. And when they were building the Thruway, the entire area was a gravel pit. That is, they didn't think that it was worth much. So Ogden and Stern originally got 300 acres. They've expanded it now to 500 acres and surrounded by 2,100 acres in the Scudamounk Mountains. But basically the land was very cheap. However, it did mean that they had to do a great deal of work to sculpt the land and make it more amenable to showing sculptures. They hired a man by the name of Bill Rutherford, landscape architect, who basically brought in lots of trucks of fill and basically sculpted the landscape so it would look a lot different. And this is the way it looks today. And all of that was done over time, obviously. And here you see the Southfields Vista. Again, this was flat land for the most part, and they created these mounds and these rolling hills so they could site sculptures. In addition, they wanted Storm King initially to have a connection to some of the great places in Europe. So they thought of the great alleys or entrances to Versailles and some of the other castles in Europe. And so they basically, this is the way the land looked when it was first flat, and they planted trees, which over 60 years gave a wonderful, iconic view of Storm King as you entered. And this is the way it looked a few years ago. However, what's interesting is almost all of these trees have died. And they've died because of climate change as it's gotten warmer up in the Hudson Highlands. So currently, Storm King started a program 2 years ago in which they had to take down these trees, and they're replanting them with a different variety called black gum trees. And this is the way it looks now. And you see the tiny trees in the distance. It does point out that Storm King has been a bellwether for protecting the environment right from the start. Some of you may remember that Con Edison wanted to build a power plant in 1962. And in fact, Storm King led the fight against that. And that was one of the early foundations of environmental law. Since then, Storm King has done a great deal to change the landscape even more, bringing in native grasses, which allowed birds to come back and really steward the environment and take care of the environment. So early on, they wanted a museum that they thought was going to be the Hudson River School of Painting. And why? That's because Winslow Homer had spent at least 2 or 3 summers very close to Storm King. So they got some of those paintings, and then Ogden went to Europe and he got some sculptures, and he came back and he said, I don't think so. I think I want to start a sculpture collection. Well, there are 2 watershed moments in the history of Storm King. It opened formally in 1960. Watershed moment number 1 has to do with this gentleman, David Smith. David Smith was probably one of the greatest of American-born sculptors of the 20th century. And his story is an interesting one. He was born in the Midwest. He worked initially for the Studebaker Company, and he was a welder. He learned to weld, welding things. He was a master welder. Subsequently, he married a painter named Dorothy Diener, and they moved to the New York area, where he first had his studio in Brooklyn, near the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Well, after a few years of that, he decided to move the whole studio, and he moved it up to the Adirondacks to the town of Bolton Landing. Bolton Landing overlooks Lake George, and that is where he then began to create all his sculptures. All of the sculptures are welded. He would weld them on the ground. He would work on many of them at the same time. But he was, in addition to this, he was a photographer, he was a painter. But for David Smith, it was as important to see how a sculpture fits into the landscape than looking at the sculpture itself. He called it his sculpture farm. And here you see many of his works with the rolling hills of the mountains behind Lake George, right there. And here's the sculpture farm with a pond. At one point, he had over 100 sculptures on view up at his studio and outside. Well, for Ogden and Stern, this was an aha moment. They said, you know, we could do the same thing at Storm King. That is, we could cite huge sculptures, allowing people to see how they fit into the landscape and allow them the opportunity to go very close to them, as well as look at them in the distance. So that was watershed moment number 1. And of interest, as we talk about him, I'll show you some of the works that David Smith did. And these are all up on Museum Hill. When they got the 13 sculptures, it really put Storm King on the map. Critics loved it. And this is one of the original. It's called For Becca. It's a very heavy work. It's obviously made of steel. And you see the ability that he could do as far as welding very elegantly, despite the fact that it's heavy and it's only sitting and on the land on 3 feet. It is perfectly balanced. And what it is, despite its abstract form, this is to David Smith, it's called For Becca, because he felt this really showed what an 8-year-old girl would be like, running, jumping, etc., etc. Ironically, he was asked years afterwards why he did some works named after his daughters. And he said, well, I hope that when I'm gone, they will be able to stand in front of this and feel a connection to me. And a few years ago, his daughter, Becca, did come to Storm King, and she stood in front of it, and I saw her crying because it was very moving. So that's one type of work that he could do. But in addition to that, he could do very whimsical works. Here's one that people think looks like an alien or a robot. And one of the things on the tours is we always ask people, what does something look like to them? Because there's no right or wrong up at Storm King. Since most of them are abstract and not figurative, it allows you to come up with whatever idea you can come up with. Well, the name of this one gives it away because the name is 11 books and 3 apples. And once you know that, you see the books all stacked up one at a time, and there's an apple here, an apple there, and if you were able to walk around, there's an apple in the back. More importantly, this is a stainless steel sculpture. And what's wonderful is the patina and sheen that it has, which on a sunny day gives you a depth that you really can't appreciate even in a photograph. This is another one of his that was very abstract. This is called Cubie. It's jointly owned by the Whitney and Storm King. And yet, even though he did that, he also fell into the category of sculptors who worked with what we call found objects. What do I mean by that? Whether it was Picasso or whether it was Smith or Louise Nevilson, they would find things on the street and they would create works out of them, sometimes actually using what they found and more often making molds. This is called the sitting printer. And what you see here is a disc of metal up on top of part of an anchor. This is a printer's box, which if you remember when they printed newspapers, you'd keep letters in there. And this is a step stool. So you take this, make molds, weld it together, and poof, you have a person. And this is where I say, why couldn't I do that? Well, for obvious reasons. Number one, you really need the creativity to come up with it. Number two, you need the technique and wherewithal to be able to put it together. So this is one of his found objects. And this is another one. And here you see he took a shovel, made a mold of it. And this, it's hard to tell from here, this is a fender from a car, hearkening back to when he worked for the Studebaker Company. He puts it on a stand, and this, again, has a personality with a head, a neck, and a body, and it almost has a priestly quality with someone wearing a vestment. But he could also do stuff that was light and airy. Here's one that is called Series of Arcs. And what you see is he has very elegantly welded these very thin strips of metal that have been welded together. And when you see this live, you really think it's going to start to move in the wind, but it really is perfectly stationary, doesn't really move at all. But the way it's been designed and set up, it looks like it will move. And the last one is called Portrait of a Lady Painter. And there again, it's found objects. He took a painter's palette. He basically made a mold of it, took some pieces of iron and an old, this is a rake from a farm, put it together. And again, it has a personality. So that was watershed moment number 1 for Storm King. Watershed moment number 2 occurred some years later. And that has to do with the work of Marc de Souveraud, whose full name is Marco Polo de Souveraud. He was born in 1933 in Shanghai, China, and his parents were Sephardic Jews. During World War II, he came to the United States. He did his training out of California, and then he came to New York, where he began to do most of his work. He had a terrible elevator accident in 1960, and he was almost paralyzed. And subsequently, in 1975-76, when he was very well known, New York and the Whitney had a one-person show all over New York. One of these monumental, huge sculptures was in every borough in the city: the Bronx, Manhattan, Staten Island, etc. The critics went wild. They said, from now on, nothing will be the same. This has changed sculpture as we know it. Well, at the end of the year, de Souveraud didn't know what he was going to do with the sculptures. If you're a sculptor and you have something that's this big, unless somebody buys it, you're going to have to store it and take it apart. Well, what he did was, Ogden and Stern went down to New York. They were very smart, and they invited him to come up to Storm King. he was overjoyed. He realized, number one, he wouldn't have to tear it apart. Number two, he felt that these were all his children and he wanted them to all be together. And here's one of them. And here's another called Peridium, which you can see when you're riding along the New York State Thruway. And here's another one.
A playground.
And here's one more. This one was exhibited for its entire life in Europe, but it was brought to Storm King just 2 years ago. It's called E=mc², and it's the largest that he's done. What's interesting is it points out the fact that at Storm King, what you see one year may not be there the next year. Certain things are on loan, certain things are out for painting, certain things may be placed in different settings. So that was Watershed moment number 2. And that really helped solidify Storm King as a wonderful place for sculpture that really nobody else can duplicate, showing these in such a setting. Well, let's take a walk around Museum Hill, which is where most of the works are. And this is the view that you see from the top of Museum Hill. And you can see these wonderful de Suvero works, allowing you the opportunity to see how they fit into the landscape, as well as going up and seeing them individually. Up on Museum Hill, right behind that view that I just showed you, there you see the columns that I talked about a little while ago. And right in the foreground is an abstract sculpture by a woman named Linda Benglis. This was done a number of years ago for a one-person show she had up at Storm King. She is still alive. She was born in 1941. She worked with beeswax. She worked with molten alloys. And this one is basically bronze, and it looks almost like abstract witches or goblins. And yet for Linda Benglis, it to her is like flowing lava at Armageddon. When we take the students and the kids on tours in the fall, most of them think that this is a special exhibit that is for Halloween and they're all witches. So, and what I like about it is the fact that it is framed by those wonderful columns. Well, a few feet away from this is the work of Henry Moore. Henry Moore was probably the most famous of the architects in Europe. He was born in England in 1898. He died in 1986. He was born in coal country around Yorkshire. And when he was a kid, he would find a bone or a stone and he would sculpt it, go back to his studio and try to reproduce it. Subsequently, he did mostly abstract work. But ironically, he was in London during the Blitzkrieg when Germany attacked England. And he cowered in the fallout shelters with many of the Londoners. And it was at that point that he decided that every person, artist, should have an aspect of humanism in their work. They have a responsibility for humanism. So that's when he began doing the work that many of you may know, Mother and Child, the Family Unit. This was brought to Storm King in 1969. It's called Connected Forms. And what's interesting is for many people, it does give a feeling of this being a pelvis with a fetus inside and a feeling of protection. This was a very difficult piece to put together. It is hollow, which meant that it was done originally in clay, and then a form was made, the form was stripped off, and then they had to fill it with the molten alloy, and then it would harden. So he was overjoyed because most of the work that you see by Calder, by Henry Moore, are in cities. And in cities, you cannot see the light and how it differs and affects the way a sculpture is. In New York, many of you know the biggest of the Henry Moore sculptures is in the reflecting pool at Lincoln Center. So he was very happy about this. That's basically Henry Moore. Let's go a little bit further. And we've seen mostly works in metal, but this one is not made of metal. It's actually made of wood. And this is by an artist by the name of Ursula Van Riddingsward, born in 1942 and still alive. She was born in Germany during World War II. Her family went from one displaced camp to another. And then after that, she came to the United States and she was able to develop a studio, which she still has, down at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. All of her work, most of it, is done in wood. Why? As a memory of the importance of wood in the displaced persons camps. They would burn wood to heat the houses, and she would sleep on a simple wood slat bed. Despite the fact that this looks like a very abstract piece, it is to Ursula an abstract mother and child, with the mother over here enfolding the baby on this side. There are YouTube videos of Ursula on stanchions, going up on ladders, and really chiseling every single part of this. They are basically little individual strips that are put on one at a time. That's Ursula Van Riddingsward. And what's interesting about her, guess what she's become allergic to? She's allergic to the cedar that she likes to work in. And you would think that she would change her medium, but if you see working now films, she works wearing a hazmat suit. And that's the way she likes to work. So that's Ursula. So if we leave Museum Hill, before we do, we can look down and see what you can see from on top of Museum Hill. And this is a very well-known work that's called Suspended. It's done by an Israeli sculptor named Menashe Kadishman. He was born in Israel. He spent a lot of time as a shepherd on a kibbutz. He was trained in London, and most of his work defies gravity. That is to say, you look at it and you wonder how it was done. Well, this, even though it looks like this is just suspended, down below, this goes down about 30 feet with rebar and cement to be able to balance it so it stands and stays just like that. There are many pictures of people standing under that, and it's an interesting shot when you get it. Of interest, a few years ago, when I was leading a tour of international people, there was a family from Israel, and when I told them about this, they suddenly got excited, and the mother said, "That is our cousin Menashe. I had no idea that he was here." And they hadn't seen his work at Storm King. So that's Menashe Kadishman. Another artist that is well known is Alexander Lieberman. He was born in 1912 and died in 1939. He was born in Ukraine, came to London. And what's interesting about him, early on, he was into editing in magazines. He was a late bloomer. He was in Paris and in New York, and ultimately he was editor at Condé Nast. He didn't start sculptures until he was in his late 40s, and he then used very large oil drums like this, painted in very, very large, very bright colors. And I'll tell you something, there are 7 people that belong to a group that does all of the care of the sculptures at Storm King. It's led by a man named Bill Seaman, who was written up in the Times this past year. Every sculpture at Storm King gets washed on a regular basis. They have trucks that go around and do it. You cannot spot clean sculptures, which means there's no touching, because if you get fingerprints on it, you're not going to be able to get them off, so they have to clean the entire thing. Any conservatory work, if there's any damage, any repairs that need to be done, must be done either with the consent of the artist if they're alive, or the estate if they've passed on. So he's got quite a reputation, Bill Seaman. Many artists and sculptors around the country will call Bill if they have a question about how to fabricate a work. This is one of his big works there. And then this one is called Adonai. And unfortunately, this is taken from the wrong angle. But what you see here, this is a abstract representation of the cathedral in Chartres in France. And there's the front, and here's the nave down here. So that's Alexander Lieberman. Walking down further on our little tour, we get to the work of Andy Goldsworthy. Andy Goldsworthy was born in 1956, still alive. He was born in England on a farm, and he loved the repetition and tasks that a farmer did, the same thing over and over and over again. Subsequently, he began using a lot of natural work in his works. He used stones, he used trees, he used twigs, he used bushes. And this is one of the most famous that he's ever done. It's called Storm King Wall. And this is all done by a group of wallers. These are people who put walls together completely with drywall. That means there is no cement. There is nothing between the pieces of stone. And it starts up here, and he elegantly weaves it all around the trees that you see. and then has it actually go down into the pond, which is frozen in this picture, and it comes out on the other side and goes up the other side of the mountain. It is over 2,000 feet long, quite remarkable. And this is the way it looks if you come up in the fall, where you see the beautiful way that you see the trees, just fabulous. The last work he did at Storm King was one a few years ago. This is called 5 Men, 17 Days, 15 stones, 1 wall. And that's exactly what they did. They put it together in 17 days. So that's the work of our friend Andy Goldsworthy. If we go back up to the hill, this is a work by Kenneth Snelson. Kenneth Snelson was born in Portland in 1927. As a kid, he liked to work with erector sets. He was very fascinated by building things, and he did become an engineer. And he began working and studying with Buckminster Fuller. If you remember that name, he was the guy who invented the geodesic dome. Well, Snelson invented his own type of sculpture. He wanted it to be flexible and yet rigid, and he called it tensegrity, joining the 2 words tension and integrity. And this is very light, hollow aluminum pipes with guide wires of metal going through them to give it the rigidity that you need. This work was actually seen by Ogden and Stern while they were riding north along the FDR Parkway. It was one of the FDR Drive. It was one of the pieces that was on one of the islands in the East River. And they said, you know what, we got to have that up at Storm King. Ironically, despite its size, it was put together by 4 men in 2 hours. It's called Free Ride Home. And while the name doesn't mean much, when you find out that Snelson liked horse racing and that this was the name of a horse that he bet on and lost, you begin to sense a certain galloping movement in the work. The only change that's been made since it's been put up is the fact that there are nets on each side of these tubes because birds were making their nests in there on a regular basis. And by the way, the last work that Kenneth Snelson did, which unfortunately he did not see, was this. Here is the Freedom Tower, where the World Trade Center was. And the next time you see it, if you look way up on top, this antenna was the last work and the model that he did using some of the same techniques of the guide wires through very elaborate hollow pipes. So that's Kenneth Snelson. If we go back to Museum Hill, we'll talk about the work of Louise Nevilson. Louise Nevilson was born in 1899, another artist who was born in Ukraine. When she came to the United States, she went to Maine. She didn't like Maine, came down to New York, and she was another example of an artist who was very poor and worked with found objects. She would walk along New York and she would find things, and what she would do is make them into wall sculptures. Here's a black one that she did. Because of her Jewish background, she did and had a gold period with a reference to Jerusalem of gold. And she was asked to do work up at Storm King, and it's a massive work, one of the largest. It's right in front of the museum building, and it's called City on the High Mountain. And it's really 2 sculptures that she put together, one on the left and one on the right. And it is supposed to represent the memory of first coming to New York, as well as memory of being in Ukraine. Down here, this little area where you see these tiny little archways is a memory for her of the silk curtains in the windows in Ukraine. I was lucky enough when they took this apart some years ago because they had to repaint it. And she had specified it had to be a specific paint that was only available in a Virginia defense plant. So it had to go in tractor trailer trucks in pieces down there, spent 2 years, and then came back. And I was lucky to be there the day they put it together. And quite frankly, it looked like me when I have anything from IKEA as I'm trying to put it together. They were using basically the directions. They had to make sure everything was exactly where it needed to be. And that's City on the High Mountain. Now, if we walk for 15 minutes down, we would come to this work, another favorite, and this is done by Roy Lichtenstein. Roy Lichtenstein was born in 1923. He was a friend of Andy Warhol. He did a lot of that pop art, you see some of his large-scale paintings of cartoons. Well, this is Mermaid. And in 1994, he was asked to do this for a working sailboat. Subsequently, students from the Rhode Island School of Design painted this on Young America, which was a boat that actually sailed in the America's Cup in 1995, and then it was brought up to Storm King. A little down from that is the famous work by Maya Lin. Maya Lin, you may know, she's American. She was born in 1959, and she's most famous that while she was a student at Yale, she was selected as the Vietnam Memorial down in Washington, D.C. Subsequently, she began doing works that were environmentally oriented. This is called Storm King Wave Fields. It was done in 1995. And what she did here is actually sculpt the landscape. So it's supposed to represent the waves of the ocean. And people can actually picnic down below, but not on the crest of the waves. And here's one, and here is another. If we walk back up to Museum Hill, we'll see the last few people I want to talk about. And this is Alexander Calder. Calder was born in America in Pennsylvania in 1898. Unlike many stories, when you hear that artists were not born into an artistic family, everybody in his family was artistic. His father was an artist, his grandfather was an artist. In fact, if you go to the Philadelphia Art Museum, you can stand in one spot, look out the window, and you will see 3 generations of Calders. 2 of the works by he and his father, and way in the distance, for those of you who know Philly, that marvelous William Penn sculpture that's up on top of City Hall was done by Alexander Calder's grandfather. But early on, he didn't want to be an artist. He ultimately trained at the Stevens Institute. He majored in mechanical engineering simply because he had a friend that majored in mechanical engineering. And early on, he was fascinated by making tiny little mechanical sculptures. He was fascinated by circuses. So he has an entire circus where he used wire and drawings. And basically, you see Alexander Calder as the ringmaster for the circus. He invented the mobile. The mobile, as you know, are those wonderful things entirely moved by air, and they're wonderful, but then these are his stabiles. These do not move at all. They became bigger and bigger and bigger, and in fact, Alexander Calder changed the course of public sculpture as we know it. Prior to Alexander Calder, every artist, every sculpture you would see in Europe, for the most part, was of a soldier or a general. Well, Calder didn't want that. He wanted this to be something that you could decide what it meant to you. He did jewelry. He was remarkably prolific, giving gifts for people. He did a design for a Braniff airline. He did a design for a BMW car that raced. Altogether, he did, ready for this, 22,000 works of art. Of interest, he was offered the Presidential Medal of Freedom before he died, and he turned it down as a protest to the war in Vietnam. And this is his largest work at Storm, which is the arch when you see as you go in. He's also famous for a very famous quote saying that unlike every artist studio, for the artist at Storm King, the ceiling is the sky. My favorite work at Storm King and my favorite artist, and this is my final one to talk about, is a work by Isamu Noguchi. Noguchi was a Japanese American, born in 1904, died in 1988, was originally a furniture designer. Many of you may have and know of the iconic Noguchi cocktail table, which is still in production. And after doing that, he began doing stage sets, he began doing paintings, he began doing work for ballet companies. Most famously, he did a remarkable minimalist design for Appalachian Spring, the marvelous, wonderful ballet by the Martha Graham Dance Company. We were lucky a few years ago to see them do that same ballet with his set at Montclair State. Well, they invited him and they said, you can pick any spot you want. And this was one of the few that they've done that to. In other words, he could choose any spot and decide where he wanted to put a sculpture and what he wanted to do. He chose the top of Museum Hill because he wanted the idea that when you were there, you would be able to see everything on everybody, all the works down below on each side. So he goes back to his studio in Japan. He has the idea of doing a work with boulders. They go to a little island called Shotoshima Island, and they find some of these boulders, and one of them is this immense one here. And he says to his workers, I'd like to have you get that off the island. And they said, it's too heavy. We're not going to be able to do it. He said, split it open. And when they split it open, they discovered that it has this hollow here, almost like a large geode. Well, all of the workers said, aha, this is reminiscent of Mamotero. Mamotero is a Japanese folktale, and it's about an elderly couple that wanted to have children but couldn't have. They had an orchard, and they had peaches on the orchard and a peach tree that made a peach that got bigger and bigger and bigger. And then when the peach fell off, the peach pick opened up and out came a boy. Mamotaro means peach boy. And in the story, the village was beset by demons. And then the peach boy gathered other animals and saved the town. So when they saw that this was hollow, that's what they decided to name it. All of these that you see were brought by barges to the United States and fabricated here at Storm King. It weighs 40 tons. It has 9 parts. And he was very specific about hoping that this would be a magnet for people at the end of their tours. And sure enough, here you see that most times at the end of tours, people, unlike a lot of the other sculptures, this is sittable, standable, and even singable. That is to say, little kids can sit inside this hollow and they can sing, and you hear the oral quality of the echo. Of interest, when he was near death, Noguchi came back to Storm King, and he was standing very close, and a little girl took his hand, brought him close to it, got in and started singing. He began to cry, but he did feel he had accomplished his goal. And he died just a few months later. And this, as an almost last slide, there is H. Peter Stern sitting in the Mamotero hollow area, obviously proud of everything that he did. He died just in 2018. But for the future of Storm King, it doesn't end. There's really a lot of things going on. Just this past year, this was a new sculpture that I have not seen. It is 40 feet wide, and it's very heavy pieces of metal, and it basically shines, and it almost looks to me like an asteroid that hit the Earth, and it's by a woman named Sarah Z. Every year, there are special exhibitions where a single artist or a group of artists will be displaying their works. In addition to that, they have an Outlook series, and the Outlook series is one young sculptor that is basically selected to have a single work at Storm King for 1 year. And they're obviously picking younger artists and sculptors because of that. Well, like any other art institution, Storm King is trying to adapt to change. As you would imagine, the vast majority of the artists at Storm King represent the most successful and well-known of artists of the 20th century, mostly men and mostly white. So a few years ago, they started an initiative called the IDEA Initiative, which stands for inclusivity, diversity, equity, and access. Just as museums and art museums are questioning not only the works that they have, but the way different people are portrayed in sculptures, as well as how sculptures and art was obtained, Storm King is trying to do some of the same things moving forward. The other thing that's happened is collaboration. So in the last few years prior to COVID, there's been live music under and around the sculptures, dance companies, live poetry. It got a real boost as far as people coming to visit when it was featured in many episodes of, I think it was a Netflix show called Master of None. And so I think now you've heard the history, you've seen some of the photos, heard some of the stories, but the only thing missing is you guys. Here's hoping you visit in the spring when we reopen, and the opportunity to spend a day wandering these 500 acres of the Hudson Highlands and seeing these timeless sculptures is always awe-inspiring, no matter how often you go. And during these times and years of COVID, I think we've learned to seize the moment, appreciate Storm King, appreciate good health. In a word, Storm King is calling. Thanks. I'd be happy to hear questions from everybody.
Fantastic, David. You're welcome to stop your screen share if you'd like.
I will.
And anyone who wishes to unmute and ask David a question, they should do so now.
I covered a lot of ground. It's not easy to cover 500 acres in an hour, guys, but I tried.
Well, you did
Okay,
a
I
good
have a
job.
question. Some of the sculptures were not originally created to be displayed in a place like Storm King. How do they maintain them if they were not made with the intention of being outdoors?
Well, as I mentioned, they do have a group of 7 people, and what they do is make any changes that need to be made. But the vast majority of works were in fact meant to be outdoors. In the small museum building, which is housing only 3 galleries and also has a gift shop, there they have some of the smaller works that were meant to be inside. What's also interesting is despite the size, there's very little damage that occurs to Storm King works. They don't site them for the most part directly under trees, and so they really haven't had to deal with too much in the way of damage. Other questions?
Renee?
I have one. I wasn't here in the very beginning of your presentation. Who funds the transportation of all these big sculptures to Storm King? Who is funding that? Where is that?
Early on, it was done as a foundation that was funded entirely by Ogden and Stern and the Star Expansion Company. That said, if you now look at the board of Storm King, there are all the heavy hitters of the New York art world, and they have a budget of $37 million a year, which allows them to maintain, bring, ship, all of that. However, it is woefully need an expansion. The museum building is very small. And when it's very busy in the summer, and there are times when it is remarkably busy, it's really not great that people will be standing online to get to the bathroom, and they really don't have enough facilities. And there is a master plan to change that.
Thank you. It was an excellent presentation. I was there once or twice. It was really great. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
David, do they have membership available, and how would we do that?
Yes, stormking.org. You can get on and you can become a member. Membership is great. It's wonderful. It gives you discounts to some of the things in the gift shop. It also gives you free admission. So that is something that is gladly welcomed. The last 2 years, because of COVID, they've made visiting a little bit more difficult. You now have to get online tickets. Used to be that you could get right there and you'd buy the tickets on site, but they didn't do that. In addition, now for the past 2 years, the tours have been stopped. And I always felt that that was not necessarily the correct thing to do, because the tours are exclusively outdoors. And I felt if everybody were wearing masks in an outdoor tour for an hour, that would be fine. But I think their lawyers felt it was too much of a risk. So the tours only started at the end of September for a very short time. And Storm King will open again in late April, early May. And that's when we'll find out, if not sooner, what kind of special exhibition there will be this next year. And by the way, to become a docent, you had to take, they had to give me, and I took a 6-week course in which we made presentations on a regular basis. We had artists, sculptors, fabricators, all come and lecture to us. And it was quite the process. There are 38 docents, and I'm one of only 3 men, by the way. And I love it. It's a labor of love, and I hope that that can continue as we get to the spring. Any other questions?
David, I have a question. Hi, Dave. It's great to see you, and this was wonderful. It's my impression from the sculptures that you presented was that they were made mostly by older people who are now dead or old. Are there any that maybe you didn't show us that were made by younger people, or are they trying to encourage younger people to make these outdoor sculptures?
Well, as I alluded, the ones around Museum Hill, and I tried to highlight the ones that are still alive. However, in the last few years, they have this Outlook series where they invite a young artist to create something for 1 year. They know that this is a problem and they have to encourage more younger artists. I will also tell you that as part of Storm King, there is a residency that they have every spring, but it hasn't been for the past 2 years, in which they will house 6 to 8 young sculptors to work on projects and do training. And that's been funded. I forget what the name of it is, but it's a separate little organization. So you're right, they need to encourage more younger artists, there's no question. And let's not forget that early on in the 20th century, you were dealing mostly with older white men. And I've tried to highlight some of the women, and I think Storm King is going to try to continue to do that. Good question, Wendy.
Great, thank you.
David, this is Alan Sanders. Wonderful presentation. I just have a question about the siting, that is to say, the places where these sculptures are placed. Some of them are placed where they are because the artist wanted to do that, have the sculpture there. But for the artists that don't have a choice or don't express a choice, how are these sites selected for the various sculptures?
Good question. David Collins has been the artistic director for something like 30, 35 years. He's a remarkable individual, and he and the advisory board have a group that will decide on where they will move a sculpture, and they need to look at the agreement that they have when they first purchased it. If it was with the individual artist who's passed, they need to consult the estate and say, we'd like to move this here, or we'd like to move that there. So it is done very thoughtfully. And what's interesting is for us docents who go there every year, it's a little jaw-dropping when we get up and we want to look to see a favorite work. It's not there, and we have to find out where they put it and what their thoughts were on that. But it's a good question, but they do have to get the approval. It's very interesting. Other questions?
David, there was a question in chat. How does Storm King provide for those with disabilities movement to get throughout the park?
That's part of in that idea initiative that I mentioned. There's access. Number one, one of the difficulties is they do have a tram, and the tram will go from one sculpture to another, and you can get a wheelchair collapsed and get into that so they can take a tour of most of the 500 acres. In addition to that, they are working hard on making sure that everything is accessible to people who are physically challenged. Because most of it is on grass, it's a little difficult to get around, and yet they have the difficulty of not installing sidewalks or things that will prevent people from walking and getting on the grass to be able to see. So sometimes people who are disabled or challenged might have to view things from a little bit further away. Another thing I should have highlighted was the fact that there are many school groups who have traditionally come up to Storm King for tours. And while I know many of them are Bergen County schools, they also bring inner city groups from Brooklyn, from Jersey City, from Newark, and the teachers get sent a syllabus about Storm King and what it represents. And this offers the kids an opportunity to really see something that is wonderful and different. Of course, some of them will bring something different when they come, like the kid who got there and said to me, "Where's the water slide?" I said, "Water slide?" He said, "Yeah, they said we were going to a park and I thought there'd be a water slide here." So again, it depends on the background and upbringing, but it's been gratifying to do those tours with so many people of different backgrounds.
David, how many times a week do you lead a docent, or a day do you lead a group around? How many days a week do you spend at Storm King doing your work?
Well, what I mostly did tours in the fall and the spring before we went up to Schroon Lake in the summer. That said, I would lead 30 to 35 tours a week, which would be not a week in total in the year. So you're talking about 2 or 3 a week that I would do. And once I was up there, I would do 2 tours back to back because I enjoyed it. I always wanted to get tours that were, if I could, not only school kids, but I enjoyed very much tours from different museums because it was interesting to see how they felt. And there were people from all over the world. There are many people who know more about Storm King who are from all over the world than people who are an hour away and don't even know where it is. So,
Do you report back on feedback from your tours to anybody?
well, we have the education department consists of 5 people. The people on the tours basically send back feedback about us, and we have to send back feedback about them.
Hello.
So
Hi.
it's very good. Well, there's a familiar face.
Oh, can I say hello? Yeah, of course. He's very friendly. He's presumed to be a.
Jordan, we can hear you. Any other questions?
All right, we're going to say that if there's no other questions for the moment, you did a fabulous, your script was really remarkably polished and put together. I have to say the fluency of that let every one of us follow in a coherent manner and gave us the next best thing to being there. And I'm sure that we appreciated the fact that it was cold and we could see it in glorious spring-like weather. And we look forward to, when it opens up again, having the opportunity to visit in person to really feel the depth. You added a 4th dimension, I think, with your program. So that really was terrific.
One last question, David. When it does open, would you be able to let all of us know when you'd be doing a tour?
Sure, absolutely. It's opening usually the end of April and beginning of May, but I will be happy to tell the temple when that is, and that would be great. And I still have to do some tours for temple members who, in fact, bid on tours before COVID shut everything down at the Ways and Means Gala a number of years ago. So I haven't forgotten that.
Well, that's going to go for a higher price if you do it again in the future, I'll tell you that. Well done. Well done.
Thanks, everybody. I want everybody to stay safe. Stay safe. Thank you for joining me on this.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David.
Presentation.
Stay well.
Thank you. Love to Perry as well.
Bye, everybody.
Very much.
Stay well.
Bye.
We really
Bye-bye.
appreciate your
By the
effort.
way, I want to thank Perry because she's the tech person that was involved in doing some of the PowerPoint helping. We have a very nice relationship. She does high tech, she does knitting, she does bridge. I can turn on the TV, streaming things, turn on anything musical, and we collaborate on cooking, on entertaining, and on travel. So we're a nice team. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Fabulous. Everyone stay well. Thank you, David. This is Bob Smolin for having a wonderful program at Temple Israel.
Thanks again, Bob.
Bob, thank you.
Thanks,
for everything.
Terry. Thanks, David. Thanks, Bob.
All right, enjoy.
Thank you
See
so
you soon,
much.
David.
Take care.
We'll
Bye-bye.
see you soon.
See you all well. Stay well.